They didn't see a paying customer. They saw a problem to be managed. A black man they could hush with cold orders and thinly veiled fear. When he tried to explain, they cut him off. When he asked for help, they called security. And while the cabin applauded his removal, they had no idea they were applauding their own downfall. This isn't just a story about a flight gone wrong. It's about power wielded carelessly, cruelty disguised as policy, and the spectacular collapse that followed when the truth refused to stay buried. If you're ready for a tale of pride meeting its match, of secrets exploding in public, and of one man they never bothered to know until it was too late, hit like, subscribe for the full unraveling, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your seatbelt won't help you here. Dr. Elijah Carter was known for his precision, not only in his career as a trauma surgeon, but in everything he did. Even travel was planned like a military operation. He was up before dawn, suit pressed, briefcase neatly packed with the materials for his keynote at the Mental Health Conference in Washington, D.C. It was a prestigious invitation and one he considered an honor. He was an expert in PTSD, a decorated veteran, and someone who had devoted years to helping others manage the very panic attacks he occasionally faced himself. But even the most prepared man could be vulnerable. He arrived at the airport in plenty of time, breezing through security, nodding politely at the TSA agents, and settling near the gate to review his notes. When first-class boarding was called, he stood, flashing his digital boarding pass with its gold stripe, and walked down the jet bridge with calm assurance. Seat 2A, premium space, room to think, to breathe. He found it, stowed his bag overhead, sat down and exhaled. The flight attendant, Amy, passed with a forced smile. She didn't ask if he needed anything, didn't offer him a welcome drink. Elijah was used to that, the small slights, so he ignored it and went back to reviewing his notes. The cabin filled quickly. The low hum of conversation, the beeps of call buttons, the clicks of seat belts. Elijah felt the first twinge of discomfort, a heat creeping up his neck, the press of bodies in the aisle, the dry air. He loosened his collar. He recognized the symptoms immediately. It had been years since his last panic attack, but this one was coming on fast. Racing heart, shallow breaths, a sense of doom. He closed his eyes. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. He opened his eyes. It wasn't enough. He pressed the call button. Amy reappeared, frown already forming. Yes. He licked dry lips. I think I'm having a panic attack. I need water, air. Amy's eyes went flat. Sir, you need to calm down. You're scaring the other passengers. Elijah blinked. The words stung more than he expected. Please, I just need some help. She sighed audibly, glancing down the aisle. You're being disruptive. I'll come back when you're ready to calm down. She turned and walked off. He stared after her, stunned. He felt the sweat break on his forehead. The noise of the plane grew louder. He pressed the call button again, urgently now. A different face appeared. Mark. Stockier. Less patient. What's the problem? Elijah tried to speak, but his breath hitched. Panic, attack, need help? Mark's face hardened. Sir, you're being aggressive. I'm going to need you to calm down immediately. Elijah shook his head, fighting tears. No, I just need help. Mark's voice rose so others could hear. This passenger is refusing to cooperate. He's being disruptive. The words weren't shouted, but they might as well have been. Heads turned. The businessman in 2B leaned away. A woman across the aisle pulled out her phone, recording. Amy reappeared, arms crossed, expression smug. We can't have this. He's scaring people. Elijah felt the room spin. The walls close in. He tried to stand, but Mark blocked him with a hand on his shoulder. Sit down, sir. Elijah flinched. His heart pounded. He gasped, please, help? Amy shook her head. We'll handle this, she snapped at Mark. Then to Elijah, last warning. Calm down, or we'll have to remove you. Elijah's vision blurred. He heard the whispers, felt the judgment in the air. What's wrong with him? Is he drunk? Why won't he shut up? He reached for the button again, but Amy slapped his hand away from it, subtly enough no one saw the motion but him. She leaned in close, voice low and venomous. "You're making a scene. You need to stop." He closed his eyes, chest rising and falling rapidly. His mind raced with strategies he taught patients, grounding techniques, breath control, safe words. Nothing worked. He opened his eyes. Mark was speaking to another flight attendant at the galley, gesturing at him like he was a problem to be solved. Amy walked back up the aisle, offering sweet smiles to other passengers. When she passed him again, she hissed under her breath, "You're upsetting everyone. Stop." Elijah's hands trembled on the armrest. He tried to speak, but choked on his words. The cabin grew unbearably hot. The engines rumbled beneath them. The captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming everyone, reminding them to buckle in. Elijah could barely hear it over the roar in his head. He saw a young mother across the aisle pull her child closer, casting a wary glance at him. He turned toward the window, tears forming, breath shallow. He was a decorated veteran. He had served in combat zones. Their hushed voices were clear enough. "He's going to scare people," Amy said coldly, and Mark grunted in agreement, casting him a look that was all disdain. Elijah wanted to protest, to explain again that he wasn't trying to make a scene. He needed help. Simple, basic help. Water, air, patience. But the words tangled in his dry throat. He forced himself to look around. The other passengers averted their gazes. Some held up phones, screens lit, recording him like he was a spectacle. Others whispered behind hands, faces drawn in suspicion and discomfort. He tried to focus on a child across the aisle, clutching a stuffed animal, eyes wide and frightened. Seeing the fear on the little girl's face made his stomach turn. He didn't want to scare anyone. He was just trying to stay in control. As the plane rolled forward, Amy finally moved to the intercom. Her voice, artificially calm but edged with irritation, crackled through the speakers. "Captain, we have a disruptive passenger in first class. He's refusing to comply with crew instructions." Elijah's eyes widened in disbelief. He shook his head weakly, whispering, "No, I just need help." But Amy wasn't listening. She kept her eyes on him, watching every panic breath, every twitch. He felt marked, singled out, like a cornered animal. Moments later, the captain's voice replaced hers. "This is the captain. We need to pause taxiing and request immediate assistance at the front of the cabin. Security required." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Elijah tried to get up to plead his case, but Mark shoved him back into the seat with a firm, unyielding hand. "Sit down," Mark ordered, voice low and threatening. Elijah wheezed, "Please, I'm not dangerous. I'm just having a panic attack." Mark ignored him entirely, turning to Amy with a nod. "Let's get this over with." Amy moved back to her station, smirking at the compliance light blinking off on Elijah's seat. He felt his limbs go cold, shaking uncontrollably. He'd never felt so powerless. He was used to commanding trauma rooms, making split-second decisions that saved lives. But here, he was reduced to a problem to be managed. Outside the window, he saw the plane slowing to a stop on a taxiway. The engines idled, humming ominously. The murmur of the passengers behind him rose to a nervous buzz. He heard words like crazy, violent, and dangerous tossed around, whispered but loud enough to cut through him. A middle-aged man a few rows back raised his phone higher, making sure he got a clear shot of Elijah's face. Elijah turned away, shame burning in his gut. He tried to focus on anything else. His upcoming speech, the notes he'd prepared, the patients he'd promised to help. But the panic kept surging, relentless. His vision blurred with tears he refused to let fall. He didn't want to give them that satisfaction. Then the cabin door opened with a mechanical clunk. Two uniformed security officers boarded briskly, boots thumping against the narrow aisle. Their expressions were hard, official, unyielding. Amy rushed to meet them, voice pitched so everyone could hear. "This is the passenger. He's being aggressive, refusing to calm down, threatening crew safety." Elijah's mouth fell open. "What? No, I didn't threaten anyone. I can't breathe." One of the officers held up a hand. "Sir, we need you to come with us, right now." Elijah shook his head weakly. "Please, I just need help." I'm a doctor. I'm having a panic attack. Please." The second officer's face tightened. "Enough. Sir, you are refusing to comply with lawful orders. Stand up. Now." Elijah's breath hitched. His arms trembled. He tried to push himself up, but his legs were weak, unsteady. The officers exchanged a look and then each grabbed an arm, pulling him roughly from the seat. Elijah let out an involuntary cry, the panic now spiking to terror. He gasped, "Wait, please don't," his voice cracked. Passengers recoiled, some gasping, others filming with grim fascination. As they dragged him into the aisle, his briefcase fell, papers spilling across the floor. No one moved to help. Amy crossed her arms, eyes cold, watching him with the satisfied detachment of someone who believed they'd won. The officers yanked him toward the front of the plane. Elijah's legs buckled, and he fell against the narrow aisle walls. The child with the stuffed animal started crying, burying her face in her mother's side. Her mother turned away deliberately, shielding the girl as if Elijah was contagious. Mark followed behind, gathering Elijah's belongings with careless shoves, dumping the papers back into the case without bothering to organize them. Elijah felt himself slipping. The roar in his ears grew deafening. The heat of the cabin pressed in. His heart pounded so violently it hurt. He tried one last time. "Please, I'm a doctor. I just need..." But they weren't listening. They hauled him to the door, opened by a ground crew member who looked away awkwardly, unwilling to meet Elijah's eyes. As they shoved him through, he stumbled onto the jet bridge, knees hitting the hard surface. His palms scraped against the metal floor. He collapsed in a heap, gasping, sobbing, unable to catch his breath. The officers barked at him to stand. He couldn't. His body wouldn't listen. Finally, one of them bent down, hauled him upright, and half-carried, half-dragged him down the jet bridge. His briefcase banged against his leg, the latch half open, papers spilling again onto the ground. No one reached for them. He heard Amy's voice behind him, talking to the captain on the intercom. "Passenger removed. Cabin secure." The door shut with a solid thunk. He was gone, out of sight, out of mind. Inside, the passengers began to murmur. There was no mention of the man who had been crying for help. Inside the terminal, Elijah sat slumped against a wall, shaking, chest still tight, vision blurry with tears and rage. Airport police milled about awkwardly, writing down meaningless notes before letting him go once they realized he posed no threat. He tried to collect himself, to slow his racing thoughts, to push back the humiliation seeping into his bones like poison. His briefcase lay beside him, the latch broken, papers spilling onto the airport floor, smeared with grime. He sat in silence, watching travelers stream by, their eyes sliding over him, studiously ignoring the messy human wreckage on display. Meanwhile, back at the airline's corporate headquarters, the wheels were already turning. The flight crew had sent an incident report before even taking off, framing the event carefully to protect themselves and the company. The email subject line read, "Passenger removal due to disruptive behavior." Amy's write-up described Elijah as belligerent and uncooperative, claiming he had shouted at staff and refused repeated instructions to sit down. She left out the part where he begged for help or where she slapped his hand away from the call button. Mark's statement matched hers almost word for word, a show of solidarity to ensure there were no holes in the story. By the time the flight reached cruising altitude, the airline's public relations team had already drafted a statement for social media and press inquiries. It read, "We take the safety of our passengers and crew very seriously. Earlier today, a passenger became belligerent and refused to comply with crew instructions. In accordance with standard procedure, he was removed from the aircraft prior to takeoff. We appreciate our customers' understanding and patience as we prioritize a safe travel experience for everyone." The message was vetted by legal, approved by the Vice President of Communications, and sent to all customer service representatives as the official talking point. Within hours, it was up on Twitter, Facebook, and the airline's website. The statement included no apology to Elijah or any acknowledgement that he was having a medical emergency. It was written to close the book on the incident, to signal that the airline had acted decisively and responsibly, and to shift blame entirely onto the removed passenger. Amy and Mark received private notes from management congratulating them on quick thinking under pressure. Their supervisor sent them each a short message. "Good work today. Let's make sure the narrative stays tight." In a small office in the same corporate building, a team of lawyers huddled to manage potential fallout. They instructed the internal communications team to ensure all text messages about the incident were purged. Officially, they cited data security and legal compliance policies. Unofficially, everyone knew why. The lawyers told crew managers to remind employees about confidentiality. They didn't want any stray comments leaking to the press that might contradict the official statement. Among the flight attendants, a hush fell over internal group chats. Amy told her colleagues that if anyone asked, they needed to keep the story consistent, saying Elijah had threatened them and refused all help. Mark chimed in, reinforcing the line about being scared for passenger safety. Most of the crew fell in line. After all, they wanted to keep their jobs. But not everyone was so comfortable with the lie. One junior attendant on the flight, a young woman named Grace, hadn't spoken during the confrontation. She had stood near the galley, frozen, watching Elijah beg for help while Amy and Mark dismissed him. She remembered the way he gasped, the terror in his voice, the shaking in his hands. She remembered Amy rolling her eyes, muttering about these people, the cold dismissal that made her stomach twist. Grace had been on the airline's internal messaging thread, watching as Amy and Mark coordinated their official version. She read their messages telling others to delete anything that might show they'd ignored Elijah's request for medical help. But Grace didn't delete her copy. She quietly exported the entire chat log to her personal email before it could be wiped. She wasn't sure yet what she'd do with it, but she knew she couldn't be part of the cover-up. She felt sick thinking about it. After her shift, she sat alone in the break room, staring at her phone. She reread the text where Amy had written, "Ignore him, he's just trying to make a scene, and don't give him anything. We don't need more drama." She read Mark's reply, "Yeah, just say he refused instructions. Make it stick." Grace closed her eyes, hearing Elijah's strangled voice in her head, "Please, I'm having a panic attack." She couldn't erase it. Meanwhile, the airline's crisis management team celebrated the initial success of their PR strategy. News outlets picked up their official statement almost verbatim, reporting that a disruptive passenger had been removed for safety reasons. The first wave of public reaction was muted, with many readers assuming it was just another entitled customer acting out. Social media managers tracked hashtags and trending topics, quietly relieved it wasn't going viral. The next morning, the calm corporate machinery was still humming along, carefully replying to any angry emails with template reassurances about safety and customer care. But the first cracks in the wall came from an unexpected place. A passenger named Helen, who had been sitting in 3A, was deeply disturbed by what she had witnessed. She hadn't intervened at the time, paralyzed by the tension in the cabin and the authority of uniformed staff. But afterward, she felt sick remembering Elijah's voice pleading for help. She scrolled through her phone repeatedly, watching the raw video she'd filmed during the chaos, her hands shaking as she replayed his desperate words. She hadn't intended to share it at first, but when she saw the airline's cold statement about a belligerent passenger, she felt something twist in her gut. She knew it was a lie. That morning, while sipping coffee in her small apartment, Helen opened her Twitter app and hesitated only a moment before hitting upload. She added one line: he wasn't belligerent. He was begging for help. Within an hour, the video exploded across social media. The footage showed Elijah gasping, voice cracking as he tried to say he was having a panic attack. Amy's flat voice saying you need to calm down. Mark's cold order, "You're being aggressive." The camera shook slightly as security grabbed Elijah and hauled him away, pleading, "Please, I just need help." Viewers could hear the child crying in the background, the mother shushing her, and Amy's voice calmly saying, "We'll take care of this." By noon, #JusticeForElijah was trending in multiple cities. Outrage boiled in the comments. "This is abuse. He's literally asking for help." They treated him like a criminal for having a panic attack. News outlets picked up the story almost immediately. Major networks ran split-screen segments. The airline sanitized statement on one side, Helen's raw, gut-wrenching footage on the other. Even the most cautious anchors couldn't hide their disgust. This video is hard to watch, one newsreader admitted live on air. On YouTube, reaction videos dissected the encounter frame by frame, highlighting Elijah's pleading eyes and the dismissive, irritated way Amy handled him. Influencers and activists alike condemned the airline. Public health experts weighed in, explaining panic attacks and the proper duty of care for airlines. Mental health professionals wrote long threads breaking down the warning signs that were ignored. By evening, the airline's social media accounts were bombarded with furious replies. Their Facebook posts about summer travel deals turned into walls of condemnation. Care to explain this? People asked, posting the video in every comment thread. A day that began with corporate confidence had turned into a PR nightmare. Inside headquarters, the communications team tried to triage the damage. But it was far too late. Screenshots of their sanitized statement were now being mocked side by side with the uncut video. Look at the difference, people said. Telit. That night, TV segments ran interviews with passengers from the flight who now felt emboldened to speak. One man described hearing Elijah say, "I need air, I can't breathe," before security dragged him away. Another woman admitted she felt ashamed for not intervening, eyes watering on camera. Grace watched these segments from her studio apartment, hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming freely. She scrolled through the chat logs on her phone, the messages telling them to delete evidence, the mocking references to Elijah, the cold calculation of the cover-up. She knew the world hadn't seen these yet, but now she knew they would. The corporate office tried to contain the inferno. Senior leadership called for emergency crisis meetings, scheduled one after another through the night. Executives shouted over each other, demanding updates on social sentiment, engagement numbers, news coverage. The VP of PR snapped at a junior analyst. "Why the hell didn't we see this coming?" Another exec demanded to know why no one had found the video before it went viral. In a private Slack channel, staff panicked, writing, "This is blowing up globally, and we're trending for all the wrong reasons." Meanwhile, the stock price ticker on their screens bled red, dropping 15% in after-hours trading. Investor calls flooded in, asking if the airline had a plan to handle the growing boycott threat. The CEO joined a 3 a.m. call, voice raw with fury, demanding scapegoats to off the press. "We need names," he barked. "We need to show the public we're taking action." By dawn, they had settled on a strategy. Amy and Mark would record apology videos. HR would write the scripts. The videos would be posted with solemn captions about taking this matter seriously and deeply regretting any distress caused. Amy balked when her manager told her. She insisted she had done nothing wrong, that she had followed procedure. But the manager didn't care. He handed her a piece of paper and told her to read it exactly as written. "Look sorry," he added coldly. "It's not about you." Then another blow landed. A second passenger on the same flight, an older man named Daniel Reyes, uploaded audio he'd recorded on his phone. He'd started recording the moment the captain made his overhead announcement, pausing taxiing for a disruptive passenger. The clip was short but damning. A few seconds of crackling comms between the cockpit and the lead flight attendant could be heard, faint but clear enough. The captain's voice snapped, "Just shut him up before takeoff. I don't care how." When Daniel first heard it again while reviewing the file, he sat in stunned silence. He hadn't even realized at the time what he'd captured. But now he couldn't get Elijah's face out of his head, the man gasping for help while being manhandled off the plane. With shaking hands, he posted the audio with a short caption. "Thought people should hear this." Within an hour, it was everywhere. News sites embedded the clip with big, bold headlines. Podcasts replayed it over somber piano music. Commentators were outraged. "This isn't just bad training," one said on air. "This is explicit dehumanization." They treated him like an inconvenience to be removed. Public anger reignited tenfold. Social media hashtags evolved. Now, hashtag Shut Him Up trended too, attached to calls for mass boycotts. Travel writers published lists of alternative airlines. Activists organized letter-writing campaigns to government regulators, demanding investigations. Even celebrities weighed in, posting the clip to millions of followers with captions like, "This is what black travelers face." The airline's leadership watched in horror as their situation spiraled out of control. The CEO called another emergency meeting, face red with exhaustion and fury. "We need to get ahead of this," he shouted, pounding the conference table. "We need control." But the crisis had moved beyond them. The story was too big. Reporters smelled blood in the water. Investigative teams began digging into the airline's history of customer complaints and internal policies. And what they found destroyed any hope of the company salvaging its image. A major news outlet published a blockbuster exposé that laid out, in devastating detail, how this incident wasn't an isolated case. Over the past 2 years, the airline had quietly settled at least 5 other racial discrimination complaints involving black passengers in first class. Each case had been settled with hush money and airtight non-disclosure agreements. Former staffers were interviewed anonymously. They described how complaints of biased treatment were swept under the rug, managers telling them not to make it racial, and HR instructing them to keep everything off email and in person only. One former flight attendant recounted being reprimanded for offering to move a black passenger to an open first-class seat, because that's not our brand. Internal training materials were leaked that included zero content on implicit bias or mental health crisis recognition. Screenshots of HR emails showed staff being coached on how to phrase apologies without admitting wrongdoing. The news story went viral instantly. It wasn't just about Elijah anymore. It was about a pattern of corporate rot. The anchors on morning shows shook their heads gravely. Opinion columns carried headlines like "Airlines racism is systemic" and "How many victims before they change?" Airline investors started jumping ship. The company's stock, already battered, fell another 10% in a day. Analysts on CNBC and Bloomberg debated if the brand could survive the reputational damage. Meanwhile, within the company, panic spread like wildfire. Employees who had quietly gone along with the company line now felt the walls closing in. Amy and Mark's manager ordered them to stay off social media entirely. But the worst blow came from outside the company entirely. Among the airline's prized corporate partners was the Department of Defense. For years, they had been negotiating a massive $3.1 billion transportation contract to supply flights for military personnel, diplomats, and sensitive cargo. It was a kind of deal that could stabilize an airline's profits for a decade, a showpiece to lure investors. For months, the negotiations had been progressing, both sides nearly ready to sign. But when the scandal hit the headlines, the DoD took notice. Not only did they see the viral footage and the audio of the captain's shut him up order, but their procurement team read the investigative exposés in detail. They weren't blind to the racial discrimination, the hush money settlements, the leaked chats mocking Elijah and black passengers in general. And they weren't about to risk public outrage by handing billions of taxpayer dollars to a company mired in scandal. Within days of the second audio leak and the revelations about the NDAs, a formal notice was delivered to the airline's executives. The Department of Defense was freezing the contract review process indefinitely, pending investigation of the company's ethical suitability as a federal partner. The email was short, cold, and devastating. When the CEO read it, he went white as a sheet. He tried to argue, tried to set up emergency calls with defense officials, but his frantic outreach was met with bureaucratic stonewalling. The boardroom fell silent as the meeting sank in. The $3.1 billion lifeline was gone. Some directors immediately demanded resignations. Others raged about incompetence and betrayal. One old-school board member slammed his palm on the table and shouted, "You killed this company for one goddamn seat dispute." HR tried to manage the internal chaos, sending out a company-wide email begging for professionalism and calm. But employees knew the truth. In break rooms and Slack chats, the panic was thick enough to taste. Customer service reps were burned out, crying on their headsets as they tried to placate furious callers. crew scheduling turned into a nightmare, as dozens of flight attendants called in sick rather than face abuse from passengers boarding with rage in their eyes. Meanwhile, the whistleblower leaks didn't stop. Grace had already made copies of the damning group chats showing Amy and Mark plotting to delete evidence, but others in the company also had receipts. Someone in HR leaked internal discipline records to reporters, revealing that Amy had been investigated the year before for refusing service to another black passenger in first class. The complaint had been detailed and well documented. The passenger claimed she had told them, "You don't look like you belong here," and refused to serve them champagne while offering it to others. But HR had marked the case resolved, with no action. Instead, Amy had been quietly promoted 6 months later to lead flight attendant on international routes. Reporters gleefully published the HR documents in full, complete with dates and signatures. The public reaction was volcanic. It confirmed what many suspected, that Elijah's treatment wasn't a one-off mistake, but a pattern of tolerance for discrimination. As those revelations spread, another email leak appeared, courtesy of a disillusioned senior manager who'd had enough of the lies. He kept reliving it, the dry taste of fear in his mouth, the burn in his chest as he begged for air, the cold grip of the security officers, the shame that wrapped around him like chains. He'd treated patients for panic attacks for over a decade. He'd taught trauma response workshops for other doctors, first responders, even veterans groups. The knowledge didn't protect him from the raw human terror that had reduced him to begging. But after the news broke about the $3.1 billion contract freeze and the CEO's dismissive emails, something inside Elijah shifted. He realized this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been humiliated, dismissed, or told to calm down when they needed help. It was about the system that promoted Amy after a racism complaint and tried to erase evidence of her contempt. It was about the child who had cried on the plane as she watched him dragged away like a criminal. He knew he couldn't stay silent forever. When he finally called his lawyer back, his voice was steady. He said he didn't want money. He wanted the truth. They set up a press conference. The announcement alone made headlines. Passenger at center of airline discrimination scandal to speak publicly. The event was scheduled at a local community center, not a fancy hotel ballroom. Elijah insisted on that. He wanted the setting to be real, honest, unpolished. When the day came, reporters packed the small hall shoulder to shoulder. Cameras lined up in a jittery row. The airline's leadership reportedly watched live from their boardroom, faces pale. Protesters gathered outside with signs that read, "We stand with Elijah," and "Mental health is not a crime." Elijah sat in the back for a long moment before approaching the podium. He was dressed in a simple navy suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt undone. He looked exhausted but resolute. He took a long breath before speaking. The room felt quiet enough to hear the hum of the old fluorescent lights. "My name is Dr. Elijah Carter," he began, his voice low but clear. "I'm a trauma surgeon. I'm also a veteran of 2 overseas deployments. For the past 12 years, I've dedicated my life to treating people in crisis, people suffering from PTSD, panic attacks, trauma of all kinds." Reporters leaned forward, pens scratching, fingers tapping record buttons. "Last week, I boarded a flight to Washington, D.C. I wasn't going for vacation. I wasn't traveling for business as usual. I was going to accept an award for my work in treating PTSD among veterans. An award for helping others survive the very thing that happened to me on that plane." He paused, and for a moment his voice wavered. He closed his eyes, gathering himself. When he continued, his tone was firmer. "During boarding, I began experiencing a panic attack. It wasn't the first I've ever had. It may not be the last. I know the symptoms intimately. I teach other doctors to recognize them. But when I asked for help that day, I was told to calm down. I was told I was scaring people." Cameras clicked. The room held its breath. "When I begged for water and air, I was accused of being aggressive. When I pleaded for understanding, I was forcibly removed from the plane like a threat. Not treated as a patient. Not treated as a human being. dragged away in front of children, filmed, mocked. His eyes scanned the crowd. Some reporters lowered their heads, blinking back tears. Others simply held their gaze steady, faces grim. Elijah took a breath. I want to make one thing very clear. Panic attacks are medical emergencies. They're not character flaws. They're not crimes. They deserve compassion. They deserve help. But I didn't receive that. I was profiled, judged, humiliated. He lifted a hand slightly, fingers trembling only a little. I've seen the airline statements. I've seen their apology videos. I've seen them call me belligerent. I've read the leaked emails saying I was just looking for a payout. Let me be clear. I don't want their money. I never asked for it. I don't want a payout. He sat on the very federal advisory committee tasked with reviewing aviation partnerships for defense and diplomatic transport. The same committee that had to approve the now frozen $3.1 billion contract the airline had been counting on. When a reporter confirmed it with a second source and published a story, the headline blazed across the internet in seconds. Airline dragged doctor off plane. He's the man who helps decide their $3.1 billion contract. The implications were devastating. Until then, the airline's leadership had clung to the idea they could salvage the deal, that with enough apologies and scapegoats they might reassure the Department of Defense, get the freeze lifted, and restore their future revenue. Now that hope lay in ashes, the man they had humiliated, labeled aggressive, physically removed while begging for help, was the same man whose recommendation would weigh heavily in any federal decision to resume negotiations. Investors saw the headline and panicked. Stock forums buzzed with angry posts. Financial analysts went on television and bluntly called the deal dead. Major institutional shareholders dumped stock as fast as they could, accelerating the airline's already catastrophic slide. Within hours, the airline lost another $1 billion in market value, pushing it closer to bankruptcy talk. Inside headquarters, the mood was apocalyptic. The board demanded an immediate meeting with the CEO, who arrived bleary-eyed and pale, still reeling from watching Elijah's speech the night before. The PR head tried to brainstorm statements that might address the new revelation, but was shouted down. Legal warned that the company faced serious exposure, not just to civil suits, but potential criminal investigation if anyone could prove they deliberately covered up prior discrimination complaints while negotiating federal work. Meanwhile, television crews camped outside corporate offices, hoping to catch an executive or spokesperson leaving in disgrace. Journalists swarmed government buildings, pushing cameras into the faces of DoD press liaisons who refused comment but didn't deny the story. Elijah himself didn't hide from it. He gave exactly one interview the morning the revelation broke, sitting in a small neutral studio, wearing the same suit he'd worn at his press conference. The interviewer started gently, offering him the chance to clarify the advisory role. Elijah didn't flinch. He nodded calmly and explained, "I've been serving on that committee for 4 years. We're tasked with advising on aviation partners, among other transportation contracts. It's not just about pricing or logistics. It's about safety, ethics, reliability." The interviewer swallowed hard before asking the question everyone wanted. "And given what happened to you, would you still recommend this airline for that contract?" Elijah looked straight at the camera. His eyes were tired but clear. "No," he said simply. The interviewer waited. Elijah didn't leave it there. "I will not recommend any partnership with an airline that endangers lives while lying to protect itself, that refuses to see people in crisis as human beings, that punishes employees for telling the truth and reward them for silencing it. I wouldn't trust them to fly my family. I won't tell the government to trust them with theirs." The words landed like a hammer blow. The clip went viral in minutes. News channels replayed it on loop. Financial tickers updated in real time as the stock price cratered further. The airline's communications team was flooded with calls from reporters asking if they had any response. The board of directors, already divided and panicking, convened for an emergency meeting that went late into the night. Tensions boiled over into shouting matches as blame was hurled across the table. The CFO laid out grim projections, showing that without the $3.1 billion government contract, the airline would be forced to cancel planned routes, ground portions of its fleet, and likely lay off thousands. The General Counsel tried to warn them that shareholder lawsuits were now inevitable, given the tanking stock price and evidence of deliberate concealment of prior discrimination settlements. When the board finally fell silent, eyes turned to the CEO, who sat slumped in his chair, gray-faced, eyes hollow. He tried to rally them one last time, offering to do another round of press conferences and apology interviews, but no one backed him. The chairman cleared his throat, voice shaking with restrained fury, and told the CEO he would be resigning immediately if he had any sense of decency left. There was a long pause. Then, without a word, the CEO stood, adjusted his suit, and left the room for the last time. The press release went out within hours, blandly announcing that the CEO had chosen to step down to allow new leadership to guide the airline's response. Reporters mocked it instantly, calling it the whitewashing of a forced resignation. But the bloodletting didn't stop there. Senior legal counsel, who had overseen the hush money settlements for prior discrimination claims, was fired the same day. Journalists had published internal memos showing he'd specifically advised staff to settle quickly and enforce NDAs, no matter the substance of the complaints, as long as the problem went away quietly. With those documents circulating online, he was a liability no one would defend. HR leadership faced its own reckoning. Amy's promotion after a prior discrimination complaint, revealed in leaked HR files, was the kind of proof of systemic failure that no spin could explain. Faced with internal revolts and external fury, HR's vice president offered their own resignation before they could be forced out. Amy and Mark themselves were formally terminated. The company tried to do it quietly at first, sending them emails that cited violation of policy, without acknowledging the real reason. But nothing stayed quiet in this scandal. Reporters published the termination letters. Social media erupted with reactions ranging from grim satisfaction to rage that it hadn't happened sooner. Worse for them, they were now notorious. Online sleuths had tracked down their social media profiles, addresses, even family members. Both faced an avalanche of threats, harassment, and condemnation. News sites ran photos of them in uniform next to stills of Elijah crying for help, creating instant villain memes that would haunt them forever. Amy reportedly deleted all her accounts and went into hiding with relatives in another state. Mark tried to brazen it out at first, but quickly realized he couldn't even go to the grocery store without being recognized and insulted. The company, desperate to cut them loose, issued a statement claiming their behavior was completely unacceptable and did not reflect company values, a line that was met with widespread derision. Everyone knew it wasn't just them. It was the culture that had promoted them, covered for them, and trained them to see a black man in crisis as a threat to be removed. Shareholders, enraged by the free fall in value, filed lawsuits accusing the board and executives of negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. Attorneys lined up to represent them, armed with a mountain of evidence now public. The CEO's dismissive email calling Elijah just looking for a payout, the internal chats mocking him, the legal strategy of hush money settlements. The legal costs exploded almost overnight, with hundreds of millions allocated for defending lawsuits, preparing settlements, and fighting regulatory investigations. Meanwhile, the financial hemorrhaging was relentless. Customers deserted the airline in droves, switching loyalty programs to competitors who gleefully offered special rates for anyone fleeing Skylux. Corporate travel contracts evaporated. Tour operators rewrote their packages to exclude the airline. The public boycott was fierce and sustained. Airlines that once envied Skylux international prestige now watched like vultures, circling routes they knew would be abandoned as Skylux downsized to stay solvent. As the next quarterly report deadline approached, accountants warned the board that the financials would be worse than catastrophic. When the numbers were finally published, they confirmed the full horror, a $500 million quarterly loss. Even that number was softened by asset sales and accounting tricks. Without those, the loss would have been closer to $700 million. The company had already started selling off valuable landing slots in major airports, their prized maintenance hangars, even entire aircraft at fire sale prices to raise cash. They laid off thousands of workers, sending pink slips to pilots, crew, and ground staff with apologies that felt hollow in the face of the scandal scale. Unions raged at leadership. Some sued for unfair practices, alleging the cuts were retaliation against whistleblowers or union activists who had pushed for safety reforms. To cap the disaster, the Department of Defense formally announced they were awarding the $3.1 billion contract to a rival airline, praising that competitors' commitment to safety, ethics, and partnership. The loss was final and humiliating. Shareholders screamed for more heads to roll. The board chair resigned. Half the executive team turned over in 2 weeks. Analysts openly speculated about bankruptcy filings, takeover bids, or even forced government intervention to prevent a total collapse of service to certain hubs. After the brutal fallout that stripped the airline of its leadership, crushed its stock value, and left thousands without jobs, the public narrative shifted slowly from gleeful condemnation to uneasy introspection. Media outlets that had once breathlessly covered the scandal with gleeful schadenfreude began running more somber pieces about the thousands of employees paying the price for the failures at the top. Interviews with laid-off crew members and maintenance workers went viral for different reasons: sadness, anger, and an unflinching look at what systemic failure costs everyone. Meanwhile, Elijah Carter stayed largely silent, refusing the swirl of book deals, speaking tours, and high-paying interviews. When reporters caught up with him at home or at the hospital, he always said the same thing: he wasn't the story. The story was the system that had dehumanized him, the culture that had allowed it to happen, and the people who needed help and dignity but rarely received it. After the final humiliating announcement that the $3.1 billion defense contract had gone to a rival airline, Skylux quietly entered into talks for bankruptcy protection. They sold off routes, aircraft, and gate rights, liquidating assets at cut-rate prices. Their once shiny brand name became synonymous with corporate arrogance and racism, a cautionary tale in every business school lecture about crisis management and ethics. But the human consequences were more complicated. Amy had gone to ground. Her face, once so confidently smug as she ordered Elijah off the plane, was now famous for all the wrong reasons. She moved back in with her parents 3 states away, afraid to even go to the grocery store without wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses. She had deactivated her social media after receiving death threats, hate mail, and endless taunts. But none of that punishment undid what she had done. She watched the company's implosion on TV, feeling a mix of bitter resentment and gnawing guilt. She blamed Elijah at first, furious that he hadn't just moved on, that he'd gone public and ruined everything. But late at night, she'd replay the videos again and again. She'd listen to his cracked, gasping voice on that plane. She'd remember slapping his hand away from the call button and saying he was scaring people when he could barely breathe. She remembered the little girl crying as Elijah was dragged down the aisle. In those moments, she felt something break inside her. Mark fared little better. He lost his job the same day as Amy, forced to sign exit paperwork in a sterile HR office that stank of panic and disinfectant. He went home to find reporters camped on his lawn. Neighbors wouldn't speak to him. Old friends stopped returning his calls. He too watched the scandal unfold with helpless rage at first. But eventually he watched Elijah's press conference in full. He sat alone in his living room, beer forgotten in his hand, listening to Elijah describe being a trauma surgeon, a veteran, a man who spent his life helping people through the very thing they called him aggressive for experiencing. It wasn't easy to admit even to himself, but Mark began to see it. The truth of what they'd done. The small, easy cruelty that became catastrophic because they wouldn't see the man in front of them. Both Amy and Mark saw the final blow on the news late one night. A local station ran a short feature about Elijah refusing any personal settlement from the airline. Reporters had confirmed he'd been offered millions to avoid trial, to sign an NDA and disappear. He turned it down flat. Instead, he told the airline's lawyers he wanted any settlement to fund free mental health clinics in underserved neighborhoods, including training for airline staff in mental health response and racial bias. The report showed Elijah, exhausted but calm, standing in one of those clinics as it opened its doors. He wore simple clothes, no fanfare, no speeches about victory. When a reporter pressed him on why he refused the money, he shook his head slowly and said, "I want no profit from their pain. I just want it not to happen again." That clip hit harder than any boycott or investigation ever could. Amy watched it in her childhood bedroom, tears sliding down her cheeks. Mark watched it in silence, the beer growing warm in his hand. For the first time, they both saw Elijah not as the cause of their downfall, but as the mirror reflecting their failures back at them. Months passed. The clinics expanded with the settlement money, offering free counseling and training to communities that had never had access. Airline employees laid off in the scandal found work with competitors who emphasized new training, promising customers they had learned the lesson Skylux ignored. At one of the clinics in the city where the scandal first broke, a new intake session was held for volunteers wanting to be trained in mental health first response. Among the group was Amy, hair tied back, eyes swollen from crying, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. She nearly turned and ran when she saw Elijah enter to greet the volunteers, but she stayed rooted to the spot, heart thudding. Elijah scanned the group and stopped when he saw her. Their eyes met. The room went silent. Slowly, carefully, she stepped forward. Her voice trembled. "I'm sorry," she whispered, choking on the words. "I know I don't deserve to be here, but I want to help. I want to do better." The tension in the room was suffocating. Some volunteers looked confused, others angry, but Elijah didn't look away. He took a long breath, eyes searching hers for sincerity. Then he nodded once, gravely, and offered her his hand. She took it, shaking so badly she could barely hold on. In that moment, no cameras clicked, no reporters shouted questions. It was just two people connected by something that hurt too much to ignore, finding a fragile possibility that what was broken could be changed. The end. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more like it, let me know by hitting that like button and subscribing so you don't miss the next one. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this plot. Did the twists land for you? Was there a moment that stuck out most? Drop your comments below and tell me where you're watching from. Let's talk about what resonated with you, what you'd change, and what kind of stories you want to see next. Your feedback shapes where we go from here.